we talk about rock and roll legends, one name towers above the rest: the Beatles. The Fab Four, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, became the biggest band the world has ever known. Their music revolutionized the industry, their influence reshaped pop culture, and their legacy continues to inspire generations. But how did these four young men from Liverpool come together to form the most influential band of all time? It all started in the late 1950s, long before the world knew the name the Beatles. John Lennon, a rebellious teenager with a passion for music, formed a skiffle band called the Quarrymen in 1956. Skiffle was a genre that blended folk, jazz, and blues, and it was a big craze in Britain at the time. John, with his wit and raw talent, quickly became the leader of this amateur group. Enter Paul McCartney. In 1957, John and the Quarrymen performed at a church fete in Woolton, a district of Liverpool. A mutual friend introduced John to a 15-year-old Paul McCartney, a boy with an exceptional ear for music and the ability to tune and play a guitar with finesse beyond his years. Paul impressed John with his musical skills, particularly his ability to play Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rock. Recognizing Paul's talent, John invited him to join the Quarrymen. This decision would change the course of music history. A year later, Paul introduced his friend George Harrison, a quiet but incredibly skilled guitarist, to John. George was only 14 at the time, but could play lead guitar like a seasoned pro. At first, John was hesitant to let George in due to his young age, but after witnessing his impressive guitar skills, he had no choice but to accept him into the group. George's precision and technical ability became an essential part of the band's evolving sound. By 1959, the trio, John, Paul, and George, were still playing under different band names, experimenting with their style and refining their sound. They went through names like Johnny and the Moondogs, and eventually the Silver Beatles, before finally settling on the Beatles in 1960. During this time, they were in desperate need of a solid drummer. They cycled through several drummers, including Pete Best, who played with them during their residency in Hamburg, Germany, where they honed their live performance skills. The wild and gritty Hamburg days toughened them up, making them tighter as a band and more experienced musicians. However, in 1962, manager Brian Epstein made a bold decision. He wanted Pete Best out. Enter Ringo Starr. Ringo, born Richard Starkey, was already an established drummer, playing for a rival Liverpool band, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. He had crossed paths with the Beatles multiple times, and they admired his drumming. When Pete Best was let go, Ringo was invited to join the Beatles, officially completing the iconic lineup. From that moment on, the Fab Four were set. John, Paul, George, and Ringo had undeniable chemistry. Each member brought something unique. John's rebellious charisma, Paul's melodic genius, George's intricate guitar work, and Ringo's solid, steady drumming. Together, they created magic. With Brian Epstein as their manager and producer, George Martin shaping their sound, the Beatles skyrocketed to global fame. Their 1963 hit Please Please Me marked the beginning of Beatlemania, and from there, they conquered the world. The Beatles were more than just a band. They were a movement. Their songs captured the spirit of the 60s. Their experimentation pushed musical boundaries, and their impact on culture, fashion, and art was unparalleled. Even after their breakup in 1970, their music remains timeless. Their influence immeasurable. And to think, it all began in Liverpool with four young lads who simply loved music.